Greetings, I'm Dr. Sean Reed, author of The Dating Toolbox, available on Amazon.com. If you guys are interested, there's a link below. Check out my book. It'll greatly increase and improve your dating and relationship life. Okay, so today I want to talk about some ways in which you can increase your dating success, your ability to develop relationships with women, to get them to love you, and to get them to stay in love with you. And one of the foundations of my book, of my program, of my system, is that you cannot get good relationship advice from traditional sources. And when I say traditional sources, I'm talking about academia, okay? And so today I'm going to explain why you can't get good relationship advice from academics. However, I'm going to give you some good advice that will improve your relationships. Okay, so I come from the academic world, and the primary reason why you cannot get good relationship advice, and I'm primarily talking about the field of psychology, is because they refuse to recognize that the male and female brains are different. Okay, over the last 35 years, 40 years, science has greatly improved its ability to examine the human brain, okay? And what we have seen through MRIs, CAT scans, and similar technology is that male and female brains are very different, okay? Female brains are predominantly white matter. Male brains are predominantly gray matter. Women use white matter much more than men use white matter, and men use gray matter much more than women use gray matter, okay? And this is the product of evolution. So over the last 200,000 years, female and male brains have evolved and they're different, okay? And my argument is that unless you understand these fundamental differences, your relationships are doomed to unending despair and dysfunction, okay? And in the academic world, there has been a resistance to understanding the fact that male and female brains are different. If you look at the academic world, which I was part of for decades, is driven by a political agenda. About 96% of psychologists are extremely liberal, okay? So because of their political agenda, they refuse to recognize that male and female brains are different. As a matter of fact, there's a term, when scientists first started to discover that in fact male and female brains are different, it was labeled as neurological sexism, okay? So there's just a general unwillingness to recognize any difference in the male and female brain, and that's why the relationship advice from academia is consistently bad. The male and female brains are different. Women are process-oriented. Men are problem-solution-oriented. And unless you recognize this fact, you're going to constantly run into trouble, okay? And I'm going to illustrate this fact by talking about some of these differences and how these differences play out in relationships, okay? The woman's brain is process-oriented. Men are problem-solution-oriented. So women keep score much differently in men. Women keep score in a relationship, okay? And this is all tied into something I call interest level, okay? Academics argue that the most important thing in a relationship is communication. That's not true. Communication is important, but it is not nearly as important as interest level. And when I say interest level, I'm talking about the degree to which a woman loves you or not. That is ultimately the most important thing in a relationship. And again, unless you understand how the female brain works, you're not going to be able to raise her interest level. Okay, and I'm going to give some examples of that. The largest example is in the way in which women keep score. Men don't understand this. Okay, so let's say interest level is on a scale of 1 to 100. Okay, a woman with an interest level of 95% is madly in love with you. A woman with an interest level of 55% is barely in love with you. And once it drops below 50%, she's out of there. okay? That's why 70% of divorces are filed by women. A combination of hypergamy and a drop in their interest level pushes women to divorce men, okay? And if you're just trying to solve the problem through communication, you're not going to be successful. That's why academics are such utter failures at sustaining relationships. Most of these PhDs can't sustain relationships in their own lives, right? I've been happily married for 19 years, and I think that outweighs my PhD when it comes to me giving advice on relationships. So women keep score very differently, okay? A man will do something like buy his wife an expensive car. I did that. I bought my wife a Porsche. They think, oh, I'll buy my wife an expensive car. I'm going to win 20 to 25 love points. That's going to make her in love with me. No, it doesn't work that way. Buy her an expensive car, you get 1 point. Buy her a $10,000 diamond ring, you get 1 point. Guys don't understand that. Women keep score differently. Now, let's look at how we can more easily, more effectively, and more cheaply raise a woman's interest level. Like I said, guys, women are process oriented, okay? Here's an example of how that works and how you can tie into that process to get her to love you more, okay? When women go through their decision-making process, they talk about it. So men will stop, we won't say anything, we'll think, we'll internalize, and then we'll come to a conclusion, and then we'll talk. And if we talk, if I say, hey Joe, I've got this problem, how do I solve this problem? Men actually want the other guy to help them solve that problem. Women aren't that way, okay? Women go through their process by talking about it. And if, as a typical man, you jump in and you interrupt her and try and solve that problem, women hate that. You lose love points. So when your wife comes home and she wants to talk about her day, which my wife does every day, all you gotta do, guys, is don't jump in and try and solve her problems. Just listen, pay attention, nod, oh, what was that like for you? How do you feel? And that will raise her interest level, okay? You win 1 point that way, just as much as if you bought her that expensive vehicle or that expensive diamond ring. So when your wife comes home, or your significant other, listen to her talk about her day. You will win a love point. Now, it doesn't sound like much, but if you do that 5 days a week, you're gonna win 5 love points, and you can see how you can easily rack up more love points by doing that. That's an easy way to win love points. Conversely, jumping in with your problem solution mindset is a great way to lose love points. Again, guys, this is totally related to the design of the female brain, okay? And like I said, you're not going to get this kind of advice from academia. There are now a handful of psychologists who are starting to recognize this. I'm trying to remember the name of the one that does. By the way, he's been happily married for 25 years, but most academics are not going to recognize this because they refuse to understand the fundamental differences in the female brain. So look at some other ways that you can win love points, okay? When your wife comes home, give her a little affection, okay? Not necessarily pursuing sex. So you give her some cuddling, some kissing. All it takes is 3, 4, maybe 5 minutes. Don't do this with the expectation of sex. When I was younger, right, my wife would come home, we'd cuddle and kiss. Very often we would have sex. Now that I'm much older, I'm 63, that doesn't nearly happen as much. But the fact that I give her some cuddling, some affection, some kissing without expecting sex raises her interest level, okay? So give her some affection, give her some romance. That's why date nights are so critical. Another great way to win love points is housework, okay? Right now, as soon as I make this video, I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna wash the dishes. When my wife comes home and she sees that the kitchen is clean, I just won a love point, right? I didn't have to buy her an $80,000 vehicle. I did a little housework, okay? Another key thing to do, guys, is to avoid arguments. Okay? Again, this is why communication is overrated, because often we're communicating about some differences of opinion, and often that leads to arguments, guys. So I've seen a lot of divorces, well, all divorces happen because a woman's interest level drops. I've seen a lot of the case, especially with very dominant, successful alpha males. I see they have a tendency to argue with their wives or to argue with their significant others. Don't do that, guys. Every time you do that, you lose a love point, okay? So keep arguing to a minimum. All right, guys, so we're starting to run long here. I just wanted you to know that you generally cannot get good relationship advice for academia, why it doesn't recognize brain differences in women. And I also showed us here how, by understanding these brain differences, we can consistently raise a woman's interest level and keep her in love.